Forensic readiness. What is it? And why would it be important for an organization? We're going to talk about that today. Forensic readiness is a state of being. It is a posture. It is the ability to perform an investigation by having all the parts in place within the organization ahead of the time that it's needed. It's the achievement of a capability so as to be able to respond with any needed evidence for a variety of purposes. That might be legal matters, security investigations, disciplinary matters within the institution, an employment tribunal, for instance, and even for a court of law. When we talk about a capability to respond, what is it that we're really talking about? Well, that would be the ability to collect information. Once collected, to preserve that information in a manner that retains its sanctity, and also to protect that information. Later in the process, we need perhaps tools, best practices, processes for examination of the information, and then finally we need to extract from that information meaning through analysis. An organization or enterprise can only respond effectively and efficiently in the event of some trigger that results in the need for evidence when tools are in place, instructions are available to the employees, the job roles, so that the proper finding, extracting, of preserving of that data takes place through the use of predefined practices for the response. It is very important that those throughout the organization have well-defined job roles so that when the need occurs, that people aren't looking at each other with a deer in a headlight look as to who should be doing what at any particular time. And then finally, well-defined reporting mechanisms so that this evidence is presented in a well-formed and understandable way. And so comes the Forensic Readiness Plan. As with most things within the IT realm and the business realm in general, if we do not commit our work and organization to a written plan, it's really not there. Saying that it is in somebody's head is really just a false belief. We need to commit to writing, and we need that well ahead of the time that it's needing. So the Forensic Readiness Plan is a very well thought out, professionally written document, and typically starts with the purpose. It will be different for each organization, but this is a 1 or 2 paragraph statement of why are we here? Why is this plan in your hand right now? Why are you reading it? Why did we create it? The scope describes what areas of the organization are affected by this plan, and the parts of the organization that will play a role when our forensic need occurs. Of course, in any initiative that requires intervention into the intellectual property in an organization, you'll have some legal and contractual considerations. So you'll want to call those out and discuss them. And anytime we have a document that might use either legalese or tech speak as part of the written verbiage, we'll want to discuss definitions of any words that might not be readily comfortable to the reader. Digital artifact might be one example that not every individual understands the meaning of. And then we dig and deep dive into the plan details. There are, of course, different sections that could make up the basic part of the Forensic Readiness Plan. Here's just one example where we talk about ownership, identifying which posts or job roles within the organization control the plan. This might be a director of information services. It might be one of the chief executive officers within the organization. It is going to be institution or organization specific, and that should be identified somewhere in the plan. Of course, responsibilities need to be called out. Who are the key players that will be team leaders when the actual information needs to be gathered? The capabilities need to be covered. Who internally and externally to the organization has expertise in information collection and storage and protection. And then very importantly, we want to talk about resources, both internally and externally to the organization, whether that requires both special expertise or special tools or special locations to store the information. At the heart is what we call the scenarios, the forensic response tasks. And one, I think, very effective method is brought to us by the National Counterintelligence and Security Center, and it just describes a scenario-based methodology. We're going to talk about that in just a minute. Just let a brief discussion of the final two recommended sections, that being classification, because there may be varying scenarios, varying resources, varying responsibilities based on whether we are investigating for a regional, state, or national crime, whether we are performing an internal investigation, whether that is external, or whether it is merely a civil dispute. Perhaps an example of that would be an accusation of harassment within the organization that hasn't risen to the level of a criminal nature. And then we always, whether we're writing a plan for disaster preparedness, or any other initiative in the organization, it is always of utmost importance to consider training and awareness campaign and walkthroughs or simulations as if the event had actually occurred and you're testing your readiness in as real life of a situation as possible. There are other possible layouts that one could have for a forensic readiness plan or initiative, and if you do an internet search, you will find a variety of those around. Here is just one, and we could see the table of contents in this particular plan, or they use the word policy. I would stray from the word policy. Policy is a special word within business that carries a lot of weight to it. It means almost the force of law within the organization. So we're going to develop a forensic readiness plan, which may discuss procedure, step-by-step actions, but many are more guidelines rather than the force of policy. Again, it's organization dependent. We see a statement of commitment, and again, a discussion about ownership of the plan itself, links, business requirements, capabilities. So we see some of the same familiar call-outs as we saw in my presentation. How a plan looks when you develop one can have some discretion to it. I would just urge you to choose a format that is businesslike, that has good coverage, and spells out the needs of the organization. Let's go back and talk about task scenarios, or what some refer to as forensic response scenarios. And I'm going to share with you the forensic response scenario template that was developed by, again, the NCSC, National Counterintelligence Security Center, and it is a scenario-based methodology. And the basic format for each scenario follows what we see in the chart. First, we have a reference number and a name for each of the scenarios, just to keep things very organized. And then, along with each name and reference number, we want to provide a short synopsis, perhaps providing an example of the scenario type. We're going to provide a list next of possible sources or diagnostic indicators that first raised the suspicion that an incident of this type occurred. All this will make a little bit more sense when we actually look at a example of a call out in this format. Finally, we'll look at a typical workflow within the organization, meaning that list of activities that should be followed in order to collect, protect, analyze the information. In this particular template, we're not trying to pinpoint every exact detail. It is more like a bullet list some talking points, reminders, and again, we'll see an example. And finally, talk about desired outcomes, the kind of analysis or end game that the organization is seeking to achieve by applying the techniques. So again, let's take the plan and bump it up against an actual example. So here we have a scenario of hacking. We have named the scenario and given it a reference number. The synopsis tells us a little bit about what we are talking about when we say hacking, a discovery of an attempt by an external actor to access the student records database. So it's a educational institution, college, university that we are writing this forensic readiness plan for. And this is one example of something that could occur within the organization that would trigger the need for a forensic investigation. The diagnostic indicator in this case was that the Network Intrusion Detection System, or IDS, raised an alert to the network administrator that such an event occurred, and we now had that information relayed via a security incident management system, or an security incident and event management system, SEIM, and now we need to do something, right? So the evidence sources may have been this IDS, may have been logs in the firewall, could have had some artifacts on end devices, and then possibly the network management system itself. So here are places within the school network environment where data needs to be protected and collected. What workflow needs to occur in this particular example? We need to make sure that the alert was indeed true and positive. So we need to eliminate the possibility that it was a false positive. We need to do an impact assessment. That would be at what level of damage may have occurred due to this breach, and possibly that would spin off some kind of formal incident management depending on the severity of the event. And we want to, in the stage of preserving information, we need to make sure that all the events logs are captured, anything from the IDS or IPS, anything from the network, anything from servers, logs of all types need to be captured and preserved. And if indeed this is a case of data exfiltration, we may have to call in local law enforcement for the reporting of a true crime. In the end, the outcomes we would like to see is that we can implement proactive controls so that such a thing is prevented in the future. We want to identify the attacker and have them dealt with through law enforcement, and of course any other future procedural or management steps that we might be able to put in place so that such an event will not reoccur. So you can see that example carried out the task flow or the scenario-based methodology by putting a particular in the place of each of these generic categories, and makes for a very solid forensic readiness plan. There are a few other resources that you may want to take a look at. There are articles. Here is a paper on the top 10 steps for a forensic readiness posture. So we can see that, again, the definition is called out. A forensic investigation of digital evidence is commonly employed as a post-event response to some serious information security incident. So there are many circumstances where an organization will benefit from this ability to gather and preserve evidence. So if you are ready before the incident actually occurs, you are going to be far, far more effective in the actual collection, analysis, and presentation of that data. So having a forensic readiness posture will only benefit an organization, and I trust that you will be better prepared to create such a plan.